The Eastern Front, October 10, 1944. The war has turned decisively against Nazi Germany. The Red Army is driving westward with unstoppable momentum, pushing back the Wehrmacht on all fronts. Entire German armies are being encircled and destroyed. The myth of German invincibility has long since been shattered. But within this collapsing empire, there are still islands of resistance, elite units that continue to fight with deadly effectiveness despite the overwhelming odds. One such unit is the 2nd Company of the 502nd Heavy Panzer Battalion, one of the German Army's most decorated tank formations. These men crew the Tiger I, the most feared tank on any battlefield, a 56-ton monster armed with the legendary 88mm gun that can tear through any Allied armor at ranges exceeding 2 kilometers. Today, this elite company is being transported by rail through Lithuania when disaster strikes. 2 trains collide near the Baltic port city of Memel. The collision is catastrophic. Most of the company's precious Tiger tanks are trapped in damaged rail cars, impossible to offload quickly. Time is critical. Soviet forces are advancing rapidly, and German units ahead are desperately calling for armored support. Only 2 Tigers can be immediately extracted from the wreckage and sent forward into action. It's a desperate situation that will soon become even more desperate. But from this chaos will emerge one of the most remarkable individual combat actions of the entire war, led by a man who isn't even German. To understand this story, we need to go back 6 years, to a young man in Rome who is about to make a decision that will change his life forever. Alfredo Carpanetto was born in Rome in January 1915, just months after Italy entered the First World War. He grew up in the aftermath of that conflict, in an Italy that felt cheated by the peace settlement and humiliated by its treatment by the other Allied powers. The nation was in turmoil, economically devastated, politically fractured, and socially unstable. But young Alfredo found his passion in art. He was talented, dedicated, and serious about his craft. By his early 20s, he had secured admission to the prestigious Vienna Academy of Fine Arts, the same institution that had rejected a young Adolf Hitler decades earlier. In Vienna, Carpaneto studied impressionism and honed his skills, becoming an accomplished painter with a promising future ahead of him. Vienna in the 1930s was a city in transition. Once the glittering capital of a vast empire, it was now the somewhat diminished capital of a small Austrian republic. But it was also a city at the crossroads of European politics, where the winds of change were blowing strong. In 1938, those winds became a hurricane when Nazi Germany annexed Austria in the Anschluss, absorbing the nation into the Greater German Reich. Carpaneto found himself living in what was now part of Germany. He was fluent in German, having spent years studying in Vienna. He was also politically aware and ideologically aligned with fascism, the dominant political force in his native Italy under Benito Mussolini. When September 1939 arrived and Germany invaded Poland, triggering the Second World War, Carpaneto was frustrated by Italy's decision to remain neutral. Italy and Germany were supposed to be allies, partners in the Rome-Berlin axis. Yet when the moment of truth came, Italy stayed on the sidelines, claiming it wasn't ready for war. For Carpaneto, this was intolerable. He believed in the cause, he believed in the alliance, and he wanted to fight. So he made an extraordinary decision. He volunteered for the Wehrmacht, the German armed forces. It was unusual but not unheard of for foreign volunteers to serve in German military units, especially those from Allied or ideologically aligned nations. With his excellent command of German and his commitment to the cause, Carpaneto was accepted. He traded his artist's brushes for a soldier's rifle and embarked on a military career that would prove as dramatic as any painting he had ever created. Carpaneto's military service began at a time when the Wehrmacht seemed invincible. The German war machine crushed Poland in weeks, demonstrating a new form of warfare, blitzkrieg or lightning war, that combined tanks, aircraft, and mechanized infantry in devastating combined arms operations. After Poland's defeat, there was a lull, the period known as the Phony War, when Germany and the Western Allies faced each other across the French border, but engaged in little actual fighting. Then, in May 1940, the Phony War ended with explosive violence. Germany invaded France, Belgium, and the Netherlands simultaneously. Carpaneto participated in the French campaign. The details of his exact role during this period are limited, but we know he served creditably enough to be noticed by his superiors. The campaign itself was a stunning German victory. France, which had been considered to possess one of the world's finest armies, collapsed in just 6 weeks. The British Expeditionary Force was evacuated from Dunkirk, and German forces occupied Paris. For his service during this campaign, Carpaneto was awarded the Iron Cross Second Class, a significant decoration that marked him as a soldier who had distinguished himself in combat. This was no small achievement for a foreign volunteer. The Iron Cross had been Germany's primary military decoration since the Napoleonic Wars, and earning it meant you had proven yourself under fire. But Carpanetto's ambitions didn't stop there. As the war continued and Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, opening the vast Eastern Front, new opportunities arose for soldiers seeking advancement and glory. The Eastern Front was a war of annihilation, fought with an intensity and brutality unmatched in the West. It was also a war where armor played the decisive role, where tank battles of unprecedented scale determined the fate of nations. In May 1943, Carpaneto made another crucial career decision. He transferred to the 502nd Heavy Panzer Battalion, one of the Wehrmacht's elite independent heavy tank units. These battalions operated the Tiger I, Germany's answer to the crisis that had developed on the Eastern Front. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union, its tanks had been adequate, but not exceptional. The Panzer III and Panzer IV that formed the backbone of German armored forces were reliable and well-designed, but they weren't superior to their opponents. Then the Germans encountered the Soviet T-34 and KV-1 tanks, and the shock was profound. The T-34 was revolutionary, well-armored, highly mobile, and armed with a powerful 76mm gun. It outclassed every German tank in service. German tank crews found that their standard armor-piercing rounds simply bounced off T-34 armor at normal combat ranges. The realization that the Soviets possessed superior armor sent shockwaves through the German military establishment. The response was the Tiger I. Entering service in late 1942, the Tiger was designed to be invincible. It weighed 56 tons, nearly double that of a T-34. Its frontal armor was 100 millimeters thick, making it nearly impervious to most Allied anti-tank weapons. But its true weapon was the 88mm KWK-36 gun, adapted from the legendary 88mm anti-aircraft gun that had already proven devastatingly effective in the anti-tank role. The Tiger's 88 could penetrate the armor of any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 2 kilometers. A single Tiger, properly positioned and commanded, could dominate a battlefield, destroying enemy armor before it could even get within effective firing range. But the Tiger was expensive and complex. Germany would produce only about 1,300 during the entire war, compared to over 80,000 Soviet T-34s. Tigers were therefore concentrated in independent heavy tank battalions that were attached to critical sectors and used as fire brigades, sent wherever the crisis was greatest. The 502nd Heavy Panzer Battalion was one of the most elite of these units, with a combat record spanning from the siege of Leningrad to the final battles in Germany itself. Joining the 502nd meant Carpaneto was now part of an elite brotherhood. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were the Panzer Aces, the knights of modern warfare. And in March 1944, after months of training and proving himself, Carpaneto achieved what he had worked toward. He was given command of his own Tiger tank. For an Italian volunteer who had started as an ordinary soldier, this was an extraordinary achievement. Tank commanders in elite heavy tank battalions were handpicked for their skill, courage, and tactical acumen. Carpaneto had proven he possessed all three. He had also, by this point, been awarded the Iron Cross First Class, a higher grade of the decoration he'd earned in France, indicating continued distinguished service. Now he would have the chance to prove what he could really do. The Eastern Front in 1944 was vastly different from the victorious campaigns of 1941 and 1942. Germany was now fighting a desperate defensive war. The Red Army had evolved from the disorganized force that had been savaged in the first months of Operation Barbarossa into a modern, professional military machine equipped with excellent tanks, artillery, and aircraft, and led by commanders who had learned their trade through bitter experience. Soviet numerical superiority was overwhelming. For every German soldier, there were multiple Soviet soldiers. For every German tank, there were 5 or 10 Soviet tanks. German forces were being ground down through attrition. Even their victories cost them men and equipment they couldn't replace. In this environment, the Tiger battalions were invaluable. Their tanks could trade at ratios of 10-to-1 or better, destroying entire Soviet armored formations while sustaining minimal losses. Tiger aces like Michael Wittmann, Otto Karius, and Kurt Knispel became legends, each credited with over 100 tank kills. Carpaneto began to add his name to this elite roster. Over the spring and summer of 1944, he steadily increased his score of destroyed enemy vehicles. The exact details of each engagement are lost to history, but the pattern was consistent. Carpaneto demonstrated exceptional skill in tank gunnery, tactical awareness, and coolness under fire. Tank combat on the Eastern Front was brutal and unforgiving. Engagements often occurred at ranges of a few hundred meters in villages, forests, or broken terrain where the Tiger's range advantage was negated. Soviet tank crews were brave and determined, often charging German positions despite horrendous losses. Anti-tank guns, concealed in ambush positions, could penetrate even a Tiger's armor at close range. One moment of inattention, one tactical mistake, could mean instant death. Carpaneto survived and thrived in this environment. His Tiger became a known quantity in his sector, a deadly opponent that Soviet forces learned to avoid when possible. His crew trusted him completely, knowing his decisions gave them the best chance of survival. His superiors recognized his value, assigning him to critical sectors when danger threatened. By October 1944, as his unit was being transported through Lithuania, Carpaneto had already established himself as a formidable tank ace. But his most famous actions still lay ahead. The train collision near Memel on October 10, 1944, could have been a disaster that knocked the Second Company out of the war for weeks. Instead, it became the stage for one of Carpaneto's most celebrated actions. With most of the company's Tigers trapped in damaged rail cars, only 2 tanks could be quickly extracted and sent forward. The situation ahead was critical. German infantry units were under heavy pressure from advancing Soviet forces and desperately needed armored support. There was no time to wait for the rest of the company to be extracted. These 2 Tigers would have to suffice. The tanks were ordered to move up to the village of Terschelen, south of Karlshof, to support the 209th Panzer Grenadier Regiment. Panzer Grenadiers were the elite mechanized infantry of the German Army, tough veterans who had fought across Europe and Russia. If they were calling for help, the situation was serious. The 2 Tigers set off through the Lithuanian countryside. The landscape was typical of the region, relatively flat terrain with scattered forests, small villages, and numerous streams and marshes. Roads were poor, little more than dirt tracks that turned to mud and rain. Navigation was challenging, and the constant threat of ambush made every kilometer a test of nerves. Then disaster struck one of the Tigers. The details are unclear. It might have been mechanical failure, mines, or enemy action. But one of the 2 precious tanks was destroyed en route. Suddenly, Carpanetto's Tiger was alone, the only heavy tank available to support an entire regiment of infantry against the advancing Red Army. Carpanetto pressed on. He had a mission, and the Panzer Grenadiers were counting on him. As his Tiger approached Terschelin, his commander's instinct, that sixth sense that separates good soldiers from great ones, told him something was wrong. The countryside seemed quiet, perhaps too quiet. Then he spotted them. A column of 13 Soviet T-34-85 tanks was advancing through the terrain ahead, clearly maneuvering to attack the Panzer Grenadier Regiment's flank. The T-34-85 was the latest model of the already excellent T-34, upgunned with an 85mm cannon that could penetrate a Tiger's side armor at close range. 13 of them, working together, could overwhelm even a Tiger through sheer weight of fire. But they hadn't seen Carpanetto yet. He had the critical advantage of surprise and position. The Soviet tanks were moving in column formation, perfect targets for an ambush. Carpanetto didn't hesitate. This was the moment he had trained for, the situation where a single well-commanded Tiger could change the course of a battle. He gave the order to engage. The Tiger's 88mm gun roared. The first T-34 exploded, its turret blown completely off the hull by the devastating impact of the armor-piercing shell. Before the Soviet crews could even react, Carpanetto's gunner had reloaded and fired again. Another T-34 erupted in flames, then another, and another. Within just a few minutes, 4 Soviet tanks had been destroyed. The remaining 9 T-34s, caught completely by surprise and unable to locate their attacker effectively, made the only sensible decision. They retreated rapidly, abandoning their attack on the Panzer Grenadiers. Carpanetto had single-handedly stopped a flanking attack that could have shattered the 209th Regiment's defensive line. His tactical awareness, detecting the Soviet column before they spotted him, his excellent gunnery, and his quick decision-making had turned a potentially disastrous situation into a German victory. When he reported to the Panzer Grenadier commander, he was hailed as a hero. The infantry soldiers who, moments before, had been facing the prospect of 13 Soviet tanks rolling through their positions, were effusive in their gratitude. But Carpanetto, ever the professional, simply moved his Tiger into position to continue supporting the defense. It was exactly the kind of action that earned Tiger commanders their fearsome reputations, and it was far from the last time Carpanetto would demonstrate his skill. As 1944 turned into 1945, the strategic situation for Germany became increasingly hopeless. The Western Allies had broken out of Normandy and were driving toward the Rhine. In the south, Italy was largely lost. Germany itself was being subjected to round-the-clock strategic bombing that was reducing its cities to rubble. But it was in the east that the situation was most catastrophic. The Red Army had liberated all of Soviet territory and was now deep into Eastern Europe. Poland was being overrun. Romania and Bulgaria had switched sides. Hungary was barely holding on. And perhaps most ominously, Soviet forces were approaching the borders of the German Reich itself, East Prussia, Silesia, and Pomerania. The prospect of Soviet forces entering Germany proper sent shockwaves through the Nazi leadership. East Prussia especially was seen as sacred German soil, the heartland of the Prussian military tradition, the land of Frederick the Great, the birthplace of German militarism. Its defense was given the highest priority. Kampfgruppe Rinker was one of the ad hoc battle groups formed to defend East Prussia. These Kampfgruppes, combat groups, were a German specialty, task-organized formations that combined elements from different units into a cohesive fighting force tailored for specific missions. Kampfgruppe Rinker included infantry, anti-tank guns, artillery, and critically, several Tiger tanks from the 502nd Heavy Panzer Battalion, including Carpanetto's. In late January 1945, the group was tasked with defending a village in East Prussia. The exact name of the village has been lost or remains unclear in historical records. But its strategic importance was clear. It controlled a key road junction and offered defensive positions that could slow the Soviet advance. On January 26, 1945, the Soviets attacked. Carpaneto, positioned where he could observe the approaches to the village, spotted them first. T-34s advancing across the frozen landscape, their distinctive profiles unmistakable even at long range. He counted the threats, assessed ranges and angles, and gave his crew their orders. The Tiger's gun spoke first. One T-34 stopped dead, smoke pouring from its hatches. Carpanetto's gunner was working with mechanical precision, loading and firing with practiced efficiency. Another T-34 exploded. The Soviets now knew they were facing a Tiger, and their formation began to break apart as tanks sought cover and tried to flank the German position. But Carpaneto had positioned his Tiger expertly, with good fields of fire and protected flanks. The T-34s couldn't easily get around him, and in a straight gunnery duel at medium range, the Tiger was supreme. A third T-34 was hit and destroyed. Then a fourth. The Soviet attack was already in trouble, but their commanders pushed more tanks forward. The Red Army had learned that casualties were the price of victory, and they were willing to pay that price. 2 more T-34s were destroyed by Carpanetto's deadly accurate fire, 6 total in rapid succession. But the Soviet pressure was indeed relentless. More tanks were arriving, and other German positions were being threatened. Kampfgruppe Rinker's commander made the difficult decision to fall back through the village of Kadir to a secondary defensive line. It was a tactical withdrawal, designed to preserve the force while maintaining a coherent defense. Carpaneto received the order to withdraw and began maneuvering his Tiger through the village. This was always dangerous. Built-up areas offered excellent ambush positions for anti-tank weapons, and the narrow streets limited a tank's mobility. Every corner could conceal death. Then, as his Tiger crossed what appeared to be a frozen pond at the edge of Kadir, disaster struck. The ice gave way. The 56-ton Tiger broke through and sank into the meter-deep water and mud beneath. The engine roared as the driver tried to power through, but the tank was well and truly stuck, its tracks spinning uselessly in the mud, unable to find purchase. For most tank crews, this would be the moment to abandon the vehicle. A stuck tank was a dead tank. It couldn't maneuver, couldn't retreat, and would soon be destroyed by enemy fire or captured. Standard procedure was to bail out, plant demolition charges, and escape on foot. But Carpaneto wasn't most tank commanders. He assessed the situation with the same tactical acumen he brought to every engagement. Yes, his Tiger was immobilized, but it wasn't disabled. The gun still worked. The armor was still intact. The crew was unharmed. And most importantly, he could see the Soviets regrouping for another attack. He made a decision that defined his character. They would stay and fight. Carpaneto ordered his driver to rotate the turret to face the likely Soviet approach route. If they couldn't move the tank, they would turn it into a stationary fortress, a pillbox armed with the most powerful tank gun in the world. His crew didn't question the order. They had fought beside him through countless engagements, and they trusted his judgment completely. If their commander said they would fight from here, then they would fight from here. They didn't have to wait long. Soviet forces, seeing the German withdrawal, pushed forward aggressively. More T-34s appeared, advancing on Kadir to exploit what they thought was a gap in the German line. They hadn't yet spotted Carpanetto's immobilized Tiger. When they came into view, Carpaneto struck. The 88 roared again, and another T-34 died. The Soviet advance faltered as commanders tried to locate the source of the fire. Another T-34 exploded as Carpanetto's gunner found his mark again. The Soviets now realized there was a Tiger somewhere in Kadir, but pinpointing its exact location in the cluttered village terrain was difficult. They knew that getting close to a Tiger was suicide at long range, but up close, its thin side and rear armor could be penetrated. They had to push forward, but every time a T-34 moved into view, Carpaneto was ready. His position, though fixed, had been chosen well. His fields of fire covered the key approaches. His crew was operating at peak efficiency, loading and firing with a speed that came from months of practice and combat. An 8th T-34 was destroyed. The Soviets had now lost 15 T-34s in this engagement alone, 8 of them to Carpanetto's Tiger. The attack broke. Soviet commanders, faced with mounting losses and unable to effectively engage the German positions, ordered a withdrawal to regroup and reassess. Carpaneto had done the impossible. Stuck in mud, immobilized and vulnerable, he had single-handedly broken a Soviet armored attack. His courage, his skill, and his refusal to give up had saved his comrades and held the line. German recovery vehicles quickly moved forward during the lull. With Soviet forces pulled back, there was time to extract the Tiger from its muddy trap. Chains were attached, and the powerful recovery tractors went to work. Slowly, meter by meter, the Tiger was pulled free. Once back on solid ground, Carpanetto's crew went to work on immediate field repairs. The Tiger had been subjected to tremendous strain, and some mechanical issues needed addressing. But by later that same day, January 26th, the tank was operational again, which was fortunate because Kampfgruppe needed it again immediately. The 58th Fusilier Battalion was under attack near the town of Grosse Blumenau, and they needed armored support urgently. Carpanetto's Tiger, along with other elements of Kampfgruppe was dispatched to assist. Fusiliers were elite German infantry, and if they were calling for help, the situation was serious. As Carpanetto's Tiger approached Grosse Blumenau, the sound of heavy gunfire made it clear this was going to be another major engagement. Then the Soviets appeared, but these weren't T-34s. These were IS-2 heavy tanks, the Soviet answer to the Tiger. The IS-2 was a formidable opponent, heavily armored and armed with a massive 122mm gun that could penetrate even a Tiger's frontal armor at combat ranges. IS-2s were deployed in independent heavy tank regiments just like Tigers, and they were crewed by the Red Army's best tankers. This was going to be a fight between equals, a duel between heavy tanks where skill, positioning, and luck would determine the outcome. Carpanetto moved his Tiger into position and prepared to engage. The battle was fierce. The 122mm guns of the IS-2s could kill a Tiger with a single hit, but they had a slow rate of fire, only 2 or 3 rounds per minute. The Tiger's 88 fired faster and was more accurate, but it still needed to hit vulnerable points on the IS-2's armor to guarantee a kill. Carpanetto's Tiger exchanged fire with the Soviet heavies in a brutal slugging match. The air filled with the thunder of tank guns and the scream of armor-piercing shells. Hits sparked off armor. Tanks on both sides were damaged and destroyed. Then Carpanetto's Tiger was hit. The heavy Soviet shell penetrated the armor, and the tank's interior became an inferno. The ammunition stored in the fighting compartment detonated in a catastrophic explosion that tore the Tiger apart from within. There were no survivors. Obergefreiter Alfredo Carpanetto, the Italian artist who had become one of the Wehrmacht's most skilled tank aces, died at his post on January 26, 1945. He was 30 years old. He had been in combat for over 5 years, and by the time of his death he was credited with approximately 50 tank kills, an extraordinary achievement that placed him among the elite of Panzer aces. Shortly after his death, Carpanetto was recommended for Germany's highest military decoration, the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross. This award was reserved for soldiers who had demonstrated extraordinary valor and achievement in combat. Only about 7,000 Knight's Crosses were awarded during the entire war, out of millions of German soldiers. For a foreign volunteer, an Italian serving in the Wehrmacht, to receive the Knight's Cross was extremely rare, and a testament to Carpanetto's exceptional record. The award was approved and granted posthumously. In photographs of Carpanetto taken before his death, the Knight's Cross wasn't visible because he hadn't yet received it. After his death, when these photos were used in official Wehrmacht publications, the image of the Knight's Cross was inserted into the photograph, a common practice for posthumous awards, allowing fallen heroes to be shown wearing the decorations they had earned but never lived to receive. Carpanetto's story is remarkable on several levels. First, there's the simple fact of his military achievement. 50 tank kills was an extraordinary score that placed him among the elite tank aces of any nation. In terms of pure combat effectiveness, he was one of the best. Second, there's his remarkable courage. His actions at Kadir, refusing to abandon his immobilized tank and instead fighting from a fixed position, demonstrated a level of bravery that went beyond ordinary courage. He could have retreated to safety, but chose to stand and fight, ultimately breaking the Soviet attack through sheer determination. Third, there's the unusual nature of his service. He was an Italian artist who volunteered for a foreign army and rose to become one of its most decorated tank commanders. His path from art student in Vienna to panzer ace on the Eastern Front was anything but conventional. But Carpanetto's story also serves as a reminder of the complex nature of the Second World War. He fought for Nazi Germany, a regime responsible for unimaginable crimes against humanity. Whatever his personal motivations, ideological conviction, sense of adventure, desire for glory, he served a cause that history has rightly condemned. Yet individual soldiers' stories remain compelling even when the causes they fought for are not. Carpanetto's skill, courage, and dedication were real, even if the regime he served was evil. History is rarely simple, and the Second World War is filled with such complicated figures, men who displayed remarkable qualities in service of something dark. Today, Alfredo Carpanetto is largely forgotten outside of military history circles. He appears occasionally in books about tank aces and in detailed studies of the Eastern Front. His artwork, if any survives, remains unknown. The promising career in impressionist painting that seemed ahead of him in Vienna never materialized. Instead, he is remembered for those desperate months in 1944 and 1945 when he climbed into his Tiger tank day after day and went into battle against overwhelming odds. He is remembered for that October day near Memel when he stopped 13 Soviet tanks with perfect ambush tactics. He is remembered for that January afternoon at Kadir when he turned a disabled tank into a fortress and broke another Soviet attack through sheer courage and skill. And he is remembered as a reminder that war produces extraordinary stories, tales of courage, skill, and determination, even in the darkest causes. The Italian Tiger tank ace was real, and his legend endures. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, hit like and subscribe for more untold stories from history. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.